Welcome to the Witness and Persecution podcast with Nik and Ruth Ripken, where we equip you with biblical principles and truths and practices learned from believers in persecution to help you cross the street and cross the oceans with the good news of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Anthony Ball, and Nik is in the studio for this episode today. And Nik, I know it's not a competition, but the last episode we recorded with Ruth was the highest one-day download number of any of our episodes. I think we're into episode number 36. And so I think you have big shoes to fill because people clearly wanted to hear what she had to say about hosting and biblical hospitality.
For 45 years, I have not tried to compete with Ruth. I don't know if I told you, Anthony, but one of our leaders of over all of North Africa and Middle East years ago came to Ruth and I and said, I've got a very important job. And it was a very big job. He says, and Ruth and I were standing there. He says, do I give it to you or do I give it to Ruth? And I said, you give it to me. And he was just like I hit him with a 2-by-4, and he was just pale. And he said, I was going to give it to you, but now I don't think I will. I said, and I called him by his name. I said, do you want somebody that makes good choices? He said, of course. That's one of the top priorities. I said, Ruth chose me to marry. I chose her. And he looked at her and smiled. He said, I will never give you an important job ever because you chose this man to be your husband. And yes, since you are obviously the one that makes the better choices, you've got the job. And so I've been dealing with that for 45 years, and I revel in it.
You play second fiddle really well. You do that.
I think it's the difference between her being first fiddle and me being a banjo player. I don't even make it into the orchestra.
We would love to hear that, though, at some point. Hear you play the banjo.
Yeah. That would really bless you.
Well, we are called to make a joyful noise, so it'd be perfect. Well, Nik, I want to jump into it because, speaking of you and Ruth, and one of the things that you hit on a lot, and you guys teach us and model for us, is going overseas, especially, but also just going on mission together as a family. I mean, you teach that, you model that for us. There's a lot of biblical principles that you unpack for us about how to do this together as a family. So one of the questions I want to ask you today is, you've talked about, going overseas. You've talked about being in some of these rural areas where you're kind of by yourself as a family, and you're in maybe a rural area, or you're in a place that it's very, very different from where you came from in your American culture. What was it like to be an American family or a Western family going into these environments? What were some challenges, or what were some differences that you saw in these environments? And what did you learn from that? How did that inform how you operated as a family and how you did ministry together as a family, learning from those early days in those rural parts of Africa?
Anthony, one of the things that both Ruth and I have noticed in being gone for over 35 years is how things have changed. One of these days we'll talk about, when we left in a week's time, there were many different avenues for the church to meet and to be together and study the word together and break bread together. And now I guess 95% of the churches we're in and visit of all sizes, they have come to believe that they can meet God and be with God's people, and it suffices for an hour on Sunday morning. And God help you if you go over that hour. And a healthy church often is how long people hang around after the worship service is over. And a lot of places we go are like that, but some places, especially with multiple services, they're in and out They have to empty the
Oh
parking
yeah.
lot. But the fact is, when we left 35 years ago, there was no hesitation in giving us 45 minutes of the service, and now some places give us 20. Usually the maximum is 30, and it's just, again, this whole concept that I can meet my spiritual needs of community and being fed in the community,
Mm,
hoping that they're feeding themselves at home, but though many aren't. And we've reduced that to an hour on Sunday morning. And so this whole way of worship we're going to have to talk about, but doing family in Africa really reminds me of rural America, and that's gone. But the essence of relationships doesn't have to be sacrificed because living on the farms and ranches and things, just the church was the center of community and things like that. We've lost that. But how do we replace
mm,
that? And there were so many ways that they taught me what it meant to be a man of God, and Ruth also, and taught us how to be in community. But I did know this. I just didn't know it was going to bite me in Kosa, and I led our listeners through the clicks of the Kosa language, but in Kosa culture in Southern Africa, uh, here's what they do when the firstborn child comes along. The family, the family of the husband, come immediately after the birth of that child, and you're going to know that almost all of them are in the home by a
mm,
local
yeah.
midwife. Medical care is almost non-existent, but after the birth of that child, immediately the family of the father of the man of the house, his mother and father, and his siblings or maybe cousins, a group of them come and stay with them for 2 weeks.
Wow.
Can you imagine? Your
No, I
brand new
can't.
baby, they come and stay with you for 2 weeks, and they study your home, and they study your marriage, and they study how you relate to any other children around you. But let's talk about the first child. They come and they study your marriage, they study your house, they study the essence of your marriage, and then they stay for 2 weeks, my friend, up to 2 weeks. And then there's this formal naming ceremony that takes place around a great big meal, and they bring that child and hold that child up in the church, hold that child up before God, and they name that child. The husband's parents do. They have done this among themselves as the extended family, and then in front of the husband and wife, the brand new parents, they named that child according to what they found in that home, what they found in that marriage,
Wow.
what they found in the relationships of people that come in and out of that home, of how they talk and how they've organized their house. And that's why, my brother, you've got children among the close of people that is they're named love and mercy and forgiveness and all these beautiful names, even the name of pretty and beautiful and closer. And you've got your firstborn child named divorce
Oh
and
no.
mistrust
No.
and hatred, and
Wow.
words that mean bad things are coming. In Malawi, if I remember correctly, there was a picture word. All of this is in one word, and it means my husband is cheating on me. He does not know
Unbelievable.
that I'm aware that he's cheating on me. But by naming our child this name, now he knows, and the whole community knows that I know he's been unfaithful to me. How would you like to go through life with that name?
Wow.
And
That's unbelievable.
you've got kids' names, evil and Shaitan, for Satan. You've got some of the most beautiful, soaring names ever created by the Holy Spirit. And you've got some of the gosh awful names that you cannot imagine. And when the second child
Oh,
is born, the parents of your wife come and the appropriate family members, and they stay with you 2 weeks and they study you with that first child. And they study what you're doing and how you're doing it. And then they have that formal meal and that setting down time where they formally name that second born child by the parents of your wife. It's a big deal.
right.
And they swap back and forth succeeding children to parents of husband, parents of wife, and they may involve other family members as the extended family gets bigger and bigger. And then the day came, and Ruth is pregnant with our third child. Now, we've had malaria so much in Malawi, and we've had so much chemicals in our body. We've even been on in the same hospital room together with the two boys then, and myself and Ruth. Ruth and I were sharing the same bed and twin and a half bed together, and the boys are on a concrete floor. And all four of us have malaria
Mm.
so bad they put us on quinine IVs. That's horrible. They put that needle in your arm, and when the quinine starts flowing through your veins, your ears start ringing, and they do that for
Oh,
28, 48, 24 to 48 hours, and it rings for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And so they did that with the two
oh my.
boys and Ruth for the first 24 hours. And I carried them to the bathroom down the hall, and I cleaned them and fed them and did everything I could. And then they went home with another worker. And then it was my turn to go through this for 24 hours. And we stayed down country where there was no malaria with another worker's family. And we went back up in the mountains and the coast where we lived and where we worked. And 10 days later, our oldest son had malaria again.
Mm.
And
That's
so
awful.
you know, so we're coming out of that culture, and we're learning now the Xhosa culture in South Africa. We had one of our best friends that did a lot of things with us who had lost her husband through a malaria related medicine. Uh, she they believe, and when we got so sick, she was one of the ones that called us and said, "You've got to get out of here. I lost my husband to this
Mm.
disease, and I'm not going to lose some of my best friends." And that crystallized some things to us. Well, we're in South Africa now, and we're learning the language and we're learning the culture, and we know how parents of the husband and the parents of the wife do this. What we never knew that was coming to our doorstep when the leaders
Mm.
of our denomination, COSA leaders, the executive secretary, president, whatever they called him, of the COSA Baptist Church, he and his wife came to us and said, well, I told all that story is the doctors told Ruth she'd never be able to bear a child again because the chemicals had
Mm.
so wrecked her body and weakened her body and all this, and said, just
Wow.
don't expect to ever get pregnant again. And God
I didn't know
knows,
that.
God heals. And almost 2 years after, we're sick for a year in South Africa, getting over malaria. Our eyes were bloodshot. There was just systemic problems going on, and almost 2 years after we're there, and we moved out of the capital city and start building our house in a very rural part. I can't say it's the bush because there's not any trees. It's pretty bare, but a
Wow.
very rural place. And Ruth got pregnant again, and as she began to show, the leader of our work shows up with his wife and says, "We know this is the third child, but we recognize how much you love us and you want to be a part of us. So when this third child is born, we're going to name him or her. We're going to come and stay with you for 2 weeks." And my heart about
Wow.
stopped. Well, you can imagine how invasive that feels to a couple.
Absolutely.
We have two bedrooms and a living room and a kitchen and an office. And you know what Africans ask us all the time? Are you going to use all that space for yourself? Almost every one of those bedrooms would hold a family, and they would share the two bathrooms and share the kitchen space and just live in community, and they're just easy that way. And so they said, we're going to come and name your third born son after living with you for 2 weeks, a child. We didn't know he was a boy at that time. And then they left, and I was so nervous, Anthony. I went to my sweet wife. I said, Ruth, if you want me to, after the baby's born and they come to study our home, I'll go somewhere for 2 weeks. So this baby has a better chance of getting a good godly name. And I was,
Not a bad idea.
yeah, I was fairly serious about it. She said, "You think I'm going to let you go through this? I'm going to go through this by myself." And so they came. They came, and at
Wow.
the end of the time, they stayed at 10 days. They called for the feast, and so more family came because up until then we'd had four of them. Just after the baby came home, and we're just trying to
Wow.
be like the local culture and be relaxed, and they get to watch us at our devotions, and they get to watch us praying with our kids. They get to watch Ruth and I how we act toward one another. There's no rock they don't turn over, and nothing that's
Mm.
off limits to them really. And so they come to us at the end of that 10 days, and they prepare this big feast, and other people come to our house, and they said, and they made some introductory remarks and said, we've got white people that speak our language in order under apartheid to tell us what to do, but you're the first white people that we have experienced that are learning our language because they love us and they love our people enough that they want to be able to tell them who Jesus is in their heart language and not make them have to use the language uh, of a race that feels superior to them. And so they said, we're naming this
Mm.
baby Siya Bulela. And my heart almost stopped with joy because I recognized that word. It's in a lot of their praise songs. And it's in a lot of
Wow.
their conversations. Like you might say something to them about a blessing that had happened, or some experience in a church, and somebody would say, "Oh, Sia Bilela," or Sa Bulela. It's more of the past tense, and it means we are thankful to God. We are praising God,
Wow.
and the derivative of that of Sia Bulela is Sabu, and that's what everybody, the kids, began to call our son as he grew, and that's what he uses for his name, and it's his it's his it's on his website. It's his email, Sabu, as like Bill is to William, and that just
Wow.
and that boy is tribal to the core. He belongs to community. I can't explain. You do something to one of his friends, you've done it to him. And he would come home from school. For a short period of time, we were in Germany, living inside of one of the boarding schools.
Hmm.
We had an apartment downstairs, and he came home one day and talked about a teacher that was very abusive to him. And when he finished, we said, "Oh, we can't let this go. We will make an appointment tomorrow. Tonight, we'll go make some phone calls, and tomorrow, we will go and talk to this teacher because she can't treat you this way. She can't say this to you." He said, "Dad, Mom, she didn't do this to me. I wasn't even in the room. She did this to one of my friends." But I will hope it's hard for you to understand as an American, that was
Hmm.
done to him because he
Yeah.
belongs to that friend. He
Right.
belongs to that friend's home. He doesn't see himself as a separate entity. He is that African to the core. We bring him home. He's 22 months old when he comes to America for the first time. And we go to the precursor of Amazon. Amazon doesn't exist then. But you go in this, I don't even remember the store's name, but you go and look at the stuff they have on the shelves, and you go and pay for it, and then it comes out on a conveyor belt, and you pick it up and take it home. Well, we
Wow.
lost track of our 2-year-old son. It was in a closed space, and all of a sudden we hear the voice of a little African American girl screaming, "Mama, Mama, Daddy, Daddy, come get this white boy off of me." And I said, "Oh, no, no, no." And I go around looking down the lines of the shelf, and there was our 2-year-old son. This is the first little black girl that he'd seen since coming to America, and he assumed she was a Xhosa speaker, and he had tackled her, and he was laying on top of her. She was 3, he was 2, and he's just talking closer to her and loving on her and telling her how much he's missed her, and her distinguished black parents came around the corner and looked at this, and I explained to them we are missionaries and where we lived and what was going on, and they didn't buy it. They did not buy
Oh
it
no.
that he was blessing her and loving her, and how excited he was because he thought that she was someone else like him from South Africa. And so when they named him Sabu and Siabulela, it was a really a great day. But I did actually tell my wife it might be better if I leave home so we have a chance to get um, a better name. Now, I don't have to really unpack this. You know where this is going. If you're
Mm,
sitting and listening to this, and you might be single, I hope I hope that you'll somehow write this into your worldview. And if you're married and you're about to have children, or you have children, if people who love Jesus in the same way that you love Jesus and believed in community in a way that's far greater than perhaps you believe in community, but if they came and stayed with you for 2 weeks and studied your marriage and studied the rhythm of your life and your marriage and your parenting, what kind of names would your children have today?
wow.
Some of them would have a name like "We don't ever eat a meal together," or their
Mm,
names might be "Rush,
mm,
Rush, 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 Rush." A lot of them would have godly names and wonderful names and even biblical names, and but I think it does bear beating the horse that's already down, but asking, because you know what, Anthony, people are studying our lives and they are watching our
right.
children,
Mm,
and the way that they name your children, that name is supposed to endow that child with the essence of that name. That naming
mm,
our third born. Now we did give him an English American name. He's named after my wife's father, and and named after middle name after one of my brothers. And so, but the name that he treasures is the one that's spoken to his heart and speaks into his essence. That the name they gave him
mm,
is a name of belonging, a name of praising God, a name of always
mm,
being in the presence of God and lifting up the name of God. And he has that sense of belonging to something that's much broader than even his own family. That if something happened to his biological family, he still has a home. He has a
wow.
place and a people to go to. I should have learned that, but I didn't as well as I should have. We had some. We're living in the same house in which our third son came home to. Born in the capital
Mm,
city in a hospital, and then we brought him home and to the house that we had built, and a very distinguished family with 2 or 3 kids in our community, important businessmen, people, and we invited them to our home for a meal. And they came, and we have two seasons. We have dry season, which is extremely hot. We would take our sheets off our bed, put them in the shower,
Mm.
get them really damp, put them on the bed, get in the bed, and be cool for at least 2 or 3 hours until the sheets dried out. And then we had no electricity at night, so we couldn't even run a fan. I tried these little
Mm.
fans that you clamp on the dash of your truck, or your car on a battery.
Yeah.
Well,
Uh-huh.
it sounds like an airplane taking off or like a mosquito on steroids, and it only lasts for about an hour, and then you're all sweating all again. And then we have a rainy
Mm.
season, which up in the mountains, in the distance, we can see snow on the mountains. And
Wow.
water freezes, and we push gas heaters from room to room that we're staying in the kitchen or the living room, or and we turn the generator on for a couple hours a day. The kids can watch a video. We can put some juice into the freezer that we had. But this distinguished family came, and I just hung up their coats. And I turned to our three sons and I said to one of them, "Listen, I've already told you 2 or 3 times, put your toys away." And I said to the other one, "I've told you to hang up your clothes, and you need now to go do that." And I said to the third one, "I've asked you 3 or 4 times to go in and see if your mother needs some help." And that couple and their children, without saying a word to each other, stood up, and they walked to
Mm.
where their coats are hanging, and they started to put their coats on. And I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "We're leaving." I said, "You haven't even said hello to my wife yet. You haven't even greeted her. Why in the world are you leaving?" They said, "We've watched you with your kids for almost a year now, and you're a good father, and you're a patient father, you're a loving husband and father. And now it's obvious that our presence is making you nervous because you're disciplining your children in a way we've never seen you treat them this way. It has to be our presence here that's making
Mm.
you treat them in a way you don't treat them if we're not here." I said to them, "Please, I'm begging you, don't leave. My wife's going to kill me. Please." And I
Mm.
took their coats and I hung it up, and I learned a life's lesson. You know what they taught me? They taught me
Yeah.
why I, us, and many in America, why we discipline our children. One of the major reasons we discipline our children, we give them more stuff than they can handle.
Mm.
We give them more food than they can eat. And then I get on them because they haven't put their toys away. They haven't hung their clothes up or fold them up and put them in their drawers, or they haven't cleaned their plates up. And in 35 years, especially in rural Africa, and they would like it different. But you know what, Anthony? If a child take if a child's having his clothes washed, he's usually naked as a young child
Mm.
because he only has that one set of clothes.
Wow.
Anthony, if that child has a toy truck or something that they push made out of wire that they've collected, and they're so ingenious, they make little helicopters. If they have a toy, two or
Mm.
three of those village boys have made it out of scraps by hand, and they cherish that one toy and they share it. And
Wow.
I've never seen a rural African child not virtually lick his plate clean. Maybe he gets meat once a month, and they do
Mm.
everything they can to put good food on the table. But most of the rural places, if they have a job, if they have any disposable income, when we went there, they made $1 a day. $1 a day.
Wow.
Can you live on $30? $31?
There's
Can you
no
make
way.
life that basic? And so when they
Mm.
eat their food, they're always wishing that they had more. That's why when we go to a
Mm.
village, the price sticker, Anthony, is on the cups that the tea's in. It's on the plate that they serve us meat on. It's on all the dishes. They go and borrow money so that they can feed us a great portion of their monthly income because their hospitality, they will fight to host us. And it's an honor. And
Incredible.
my wife has such a big heart. Early on, she would say, "Now, Nick, you need to leave some money here. These folks have really sacrificed." I said, "Ruth, I will never shame them by doing this. They fought to have us, and they are honored that we're here. And I can't take away the joy of their sacrifice by demeaning it and making little of it by paying them for keeping us. It's not, I grew up
Mm.
so poor, I knew that's not something that I could do. And being the sensitive learner that she is, her big heart and mine got together really quick. But I convinced that family to take off their coats and let me hang them up again, and that I would relax, and I did relax and just let kids be kids.
Mm.
And I realized again why did I discipline my boys? Is I gave them stuff that's too much for them to handle. I gave them too many toys.
Right.
I gave them too many clothes. And the food that they left on the table that we had heaped on their plates in such abundance at their age, it was impossible for them to consume them. And I
Mm.
learned one of the major reasons, the two reasons why we discipline our children the way we do is two reasons, Anthony. One is I've had a really bad day and I take it out on my children
Mm.
because I know better than take it
Right.
out on my wife. That doesn't pay too many
That's true.
dividends. And,
That's true.
and so the reason I discipline my children is I have a bad day and I take it out on them and I call it Christian discipline. And secondly, I discipline my children because I've overwhelmed them with the stuff of this world and they don't have the physical, moral, mental capacity to find a place for all that stuff.
That's right.
We have mentored hundreds of new workers overseas, and I've watched them. Almost all the couples fall into this trap, and especially us dads. And I can't tell you how many scores of time that I've watched somebody in my home and the the how rough they were in language to their kids, or how they said, "Don't you dare break that," or if they broke something, how wait till I get you home, and and all of this,
Mm.
just emotional pressure, and I usually watch that. I don't embarrass a guy in front of his wife or his children, but I ask that guy, that father, the husband, "Hey, can we have some time together tomorrow or the next day?" And it always
Mm.
works out. And I said, you know, tell him a little bit of my story. And I said, I watched you yesterday discipline your child in front of other people. Can you tell me why you felt you needed to do it at that time? And he'll say, well, I told him not to pick up something and he picked it up. And, or, he didn't clean up his plate that you all went to a great deal of trouble to. And I asked him, I'll ask these dads, I said, how was your day before you came to my house? It was a hard day. It was a
Mm.
hard day. And I will ask, do you see any relationship between what you said to your child in my house yesterday and the bad day that you were having? Now, there'll be a few times when that person's going to be mad at me for a few days, but these are good people. And I'll ask them, will you go
Mm.
home and talk about this with your wife? And if you need to, would you ask your kids some questions? And in 35 years on the mission field, once we knew this was going on in our own hearts, and we knew that no one else would want to do this and be in this trap that we were in when we came to Africa, that I've learned to ask them these questions, and 100% of them have, just a few days, come back to me and said, I need to confess to you, I was having a really bad day. Or I need to confess to you,
Mm.
we've just come back from furlough, and our kids haven't had the things of this world much, since where we're living doesn't have them. And so we just loaded up on it on furlough, and we filled a container with the stuff. And we've got so much stuff for our kids in the house, there's no way they can manage it.
Mm.
And so when we get big, we fill our garages, we fill our houses, we fill a
Hmm.
storage room that we pay for with stuff that
Right.
we have no space for it in our
Mm.
house. And we got so much stuff we can't manage it. And we know something because of this. If we don't get young couples to come overseas as a family, and singles also, usually by the time that they're 30, we don't get them because they've got credit cards maxed out. They've got a house payment that's significant, and they own a mortgage on a couple cars, and they're in so much debt by the time they're 30 years of age, they can't get out of debt enough to be obedient to God and go overseas and be a
Mm.
worker. They can't.
Wow.
By the time they're 30 years of age, they don't expect to own their house, because nowadays, when I grew up, it's not about that, but when I grew up, they would ask you, how much debt are you willing to incur? And now I heard them asking these young couples, how much more in monthly payments can you afford?
Mm.
It's not about debt.
Big difference.
It's a huge difference in that. And a pastor, when I was talking to him, when we were getting ready to buy or build our first ever house, we were in Florida. And I looked on Zillow, and I looked at the price of the house. And then I looked at the price of what the house would cost after I made 30 years of payments. And I was out of my mind. And I asked my best friend, I said, this can't be true, is it? He said, this is exactly the way it is. And all of this interest goes up front. And there was 5 young couples having a meal with us, and we were off to the side. And he asked those 5 Christian couples, he said, guys, let me have your attention. How many of you
Mm.
expect to ever own your home? And it didn't take them hardly an instant. They said, we'll never own our homes. We don't even know if we'll ever own a car because we'll trade it in before we paid it off. And so, how can we get people to go and be obedient to the Great Commission if we have so much stuff? And how do we raise our children in godly ways if we overload them? And I know it's an expression of our love. It's an expression of what we want for them, but it's also an expression of what marketing does to us, and what the TV throws
Mm.
at us, and what our
Right.
neighbors might have. And so I'm just asking our listeners, will you just take this to heart and pray about it, as maybe go talk to your spouse, or if you're single, just help us who are married as you listen to us, and as you perhaps, in your future, if it's God's will for you to marry. Again, I believe the 2 major reasons why we discipline our children are not biblically based. It's based in a culture that gives our kids so much stuff and so much food that they don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to hang up all of their clothes, fold it and put it away, put their toys neatly away. And Anthony, that's not the point. Let's say if they can do that, should they?
Mm.
Should they?
Yeah.
I I got a bag of candy for Christmas, a small, what would be a Ziploc bag now. Each one of us, 7 kids, as they all came along, we got a piece of fruit, we got one piece of clothing, and we got like a plastic truck or tractor or something like that. And I never knew that I was mistreated. Now, our family was that poor. Often, what I got under the Christmas tree was a ball of twine. And when I
Hmm.
unrolled that twine, it went out the living room window. It went down the hill behind our house, went into the barn behind our house, and it was around a calf's neck or a baby pig's neck. And I
Wow.
was given that animal to raise so that at Thanksgiving or Christmas, the family could eat it. But I enjoyed raising these critters so much that, and knowing that this was what life was like. So it wasn't a big deal, and I wasn't mistreated. But when I married and I got into Christian culture, and I came into homes for the first time, and the Christmas presents go halfway up the tree, I never understood that. And today, I don't understand that.
Mm.
I don't understand Christian culture that will go into debt to give their kids things that will turn around and discipline them because we gave it to them. Let me
Wow,
tell
that's a
you,
really good point.
in 35 years in Africa, I never saw one child spanked except once.
Huh,
And we're driving
really?
out in the bush, and all of a sudden, our oldest son yells in terror, "Dad, stop the car! Dad, stop the car! Dad, you've got to stop this! You've got to stop this! You've got to stop this!" And I slammed on the brakes on the dirt road, and I'm looking around for some danger, and I can't see it. And I said to our oldest son, "What is it?" He said, "Look at that house! Look at that porch!" And on the porch of this very small, it wasn't a hut, but it was a small little house. A father had a stick and was spanking his child with it. Our kids had never seen that. They knew
Wow.
that was so anathema to that whole culture. It just shocked their socks off, and they
Hmm.
wanted me to go over and stop it. But in 35 years, in all the cultures that we've been in, only one time have we ever seen a kid physically disciplined. They were disciplined
Mm.
by the tone of the voice, the dissatisfaction of a grandmother or a grandfather, someone that when their actions were such, that grandparent, that parent, that aunt, that uncle took them in arms or walked them out into the woods and told them of a better way of being and told them about how not to disappoint their creator and how not to disappoint their father and mother, and this was often done in private, and to say that in 35 years, how many thousands of places and millions of people that we walked among, and we've only seen at a distance, and it was our older son that saw it in the bush. We've only seen one kid physically disciplined because they don't give their kids uh, they don't have enough clothes. They don't have to worry about putting it away, and they don't have to worry about cleaning their plates or putting their toys away. But that is the result. The cause is from a very early age they're taught to love and respect their family, and they're taught about
Mm.
being obedient and what it means to be a man and be a young lady and a young man, and the worst thing that would break their heart is see a frown on the face of their old grandmother or their grandfather, or to see that they've disappointed their father or mother or aunt or uncle. And it's those tender relationships that discipline our hearts more like the Holy Spirit does than anything. God has never physically beat me,
Mm.
but He sure has shown His disappointment in me and His dissatisfaction. And when I look at the cross and realize how much I've let my father down, that's when I vow
Mm.
not to ever do that again. And so I think honoring your mother and father, which is the first commandment with a blessing attached to it,
Mm.
that is the foundation of how to raise our children, is to be parents and grandparents worthy of honor, worthy of respect.
Wow. Right.
Speak with that soft voice that turns away wrath, the Bible says. And yet we quote that Bible verse to spare the rod. I don't know if it's a Bible verse or not. Spare the rod,
Yeah, it
you
is. You're
you,
right.
you spoil the children. I think a rod leaves really pretty horrible marks, and so there is an increased uh, among conservative Christians since I've been home use of physical discipline. Well, you're parents of your children. I'm not. I'm just telling you, uh, uh, go to Africa. Do that
Mm.
in front of the community there of believers and non believers, and let them perhaps coach you in a way that makes sure when children are disobedient and when they exercise their fallenness at the certain ages, then I think you need to speak into that. But if our discipline of them is based upon the stuff that we give them, then I think the discipline is ours to bear, not our children's.
Mm.
So
Wow.
that's
That's
to.
really No, go ahead.
I'm just saying that's just today my wanting to bring Africa's heart home to a culture that is so abusive to its children, that sells their
Mm.
children in as slaves. And on the news last night again was the arrest of a man and a woman that had killed their infant child here where we live. and
Mm.
and the same thing. I was down in Florida for 4 days and watched the news and saw some of the same thing there. And I think Africa has learned to do this because of perhaps a lack of resources. But we can limit the resources that we have and we think we need, that causes us animosity toward others and causes us
Mm.
to discipline those we love because of the stuff that we've given them that they're not old enough to manage.
Mm.
And they carry that all the way in to adulthood.
Wow. That is not only the really wise words, but I don't think I've thought of those perspectives ever until you said that. That well, what is the root of how we act towards them is our fault, not theirs.
Yeah, you just want to think
Wow.
about what is the precipitating factor that the child is getting the blame for. Again, it may be again a little heart that's showing some signs of rebellion, but I think there are also spiritual, biblical ways of. I know the way our boys grew up, they would do anything on earth to keep from disappointing their mother
Mm.
because they loved her
Probably
so
still
much.
do.
And she could look at them, and that would mean so much more than any kind of physical discipline could ever be, because they know how
Mm.
much that we love them. And they know when they look at their mother for sure, there was someone that would die for them over and over again.
Mm.
They
I love
hate,
that.
they hate to watch their mother cry.
Mm. Well, they
especially
should too.
especially if they are the precipitators of those tears.
I don't doubt it. And I love how the just the that community aspect and what I, we've talked about this before, and I think you've mentioned this in different podcasts, but just the idea that what the wisdom and the insight coming from this particular episode is because when you went overseas, maybe you went with the intention to teach others and to kind of be the one who brings something to somebody else, but in reality, this wisdom and insight comes from the fact that you learned from these other cultures. You learn from these other people, and I can't help but wonder or think maybe that uh, a big aspect of when we go in obedience to these other places, sometimes it's not just for us to take something, but it's for us to bring something back and to learn and to humbly say, what do these believers have to teach me that I don't quite know or I don't quite get right yet?
What if our investment in others overseas will never equal God's investment to us?
Wow, that's a powerful thought.
Now, what if our investment overseas will never equal God's investment in us, our local people's investment in us?
Mm, that's that challenges a lot of missions strategies.
Well,
That's a challenging word.
I mean, why do we go? Because we think we know it all, or because we seek to know more and to experience more? And I know the arrogance that I went with, and I know that my wife always says to new people, they ask her about going, she says, go with your hands open and your heart open, and
Mm,
go as a learner. Don't go as someone that knows it all. And we'll talk more about specifically how this plays out in church planning, witness. But again, the essence of the body of Christ is in the home. And
mm,
the majority, when the body of Christ meets is coming Sunday, the majority of the majority place in which it will meet will be in homes around the world, in the Chinas,
right.
in the Indias, in sub-Saharan Africa, in South America, uh, making your house the center of worship rather than the
Mm,
center. No, I don't want to say that, because we don't make it the center of discipline. But I do want us to worship more than we extend the rod. I want us to extend the
mm,
love, and take children up in my lap now and say, you know, you broke your mom's heart today, and you broke my heart today. How can we fix this?
hmm.
Wow. That leads to a biblical conversation, and that leads a father to holding his son and praying with them and having them pray to God and listening to that prayer. And so your discipline leads to a changed heart rather than a broken heart.
Mm. Wow, that's powerful.
That's
We
my
may need to get you to write a parenting book.
that's my tweet for the day. Yeah, I would put my photograph on the front of the book and say, "Don't be like this man."
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Nick, we appreciate your time today, and we appreciate you bringing a little bit of Africa back to here, and just that insight on community and being a part of community. And in all honesty, I am still kind of working through what you said. I wrote it down. I said the meaning of the child a child's name reflects the essence of the family.
Wow.
And we don't see that unless we're in community. We don't see that unless people are in our lives and in our homes and vice versa. We don't get to live out that truth, and if we're not in community. And so we need to bring a little bit of Africa over here. And we need to put that in our homes, our churches, and our lives.
Yeah,
I love that. Well,
I do
Nick,
too. Thank you, Anthony, for hosting us today.
You're welcome. Thank you to our listeners for hanging with us. And we pray that there's something that can be very practical and beneficial to you today. And so we thank you for listening. And Nick, thank you so much. And we'll see what the numbers are this week. But I think Ruth is probably still going to beat you. But we do love the fact that we can get sometimes one, sometimes the other, sometimes both of you to really hone in and take some time to zero in on these truths that we've learned from other cultures, believers in persecution, to help us live out our obedience to Jesus.
Yeah,
We love it.
Ruth and I stopped competing with each other a long time ago, and we revel in each other's successes, and we realize that when each one of us fail, it's probably the other one didn't carry us the way that we should have been carried. But I just revel in the fact that that God saw my need and saw my heart and brought Ruth into it.
Well, we all are, because that's why we're here today.
There we are.
So
that's right.
We're so deeply appreciative of that.
Go hug
well, Nick,
your
thank
wife.
you so much for your time.
Go hug your kids.
I will. You too.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you to our listeners today. This has been Witness in Persecution, and we will be with you next time.